You're listening to His Empire of Dirt, Chapter 25. Elizabeth Afton tricked her brother. Michael inexplicably began doodling things like Jeremy Afton or Mike Fitzgerald into his notebook. It was silly, but it made his heart warm and his mind fuzzy. The first time he'd kissed Jeremy, Dad almost walked in. Well, he did walk in, but only after the matter had concluded. Jeremy had been stressing out about tests because he was a poor test taker, because his mind ran too quickly, but Mike loved that about him. He loved that Jeremy never shut up. He loved every word that came out of the blonde boy's mouth. Jeremy was lamenting.
I don't know, man. I can't remember all this bogus shit. I don't know when the frickin' Treaty of Versailles was signed. I don't even know what a Versailles is.
He was saying Versailles like Versailles.
And it's freaking me out, Mike. I'll help you,
Mike offered. They were sitting in Mike's bedroom, Pink Floyd playing from Jeremy's boombox, soft enough that it wouldn't bother Dad, but loud enough that they could make out the guitar riffs.
I'm no good either, but between the two of us, we should be able to remember a single date. No, Mikey, you gotta stop saying that. You're so smart.
Mike giggled.
No, I'm not.
It was true. He was newly 16 and was hardly scraping by in his classes. Dad had stopped asking for Mike's report cards. Dad was happier than ever in 1985, and at the same time 4 children were dead. Dad had come home after each one, a vial of muted purple liquid in his grasp, and he would laugh disastrously in the garage, and he'd be soaked in blood. And after the 3rd child, he had grabbed Mike by the collar with a manic look in his eyes and said, "I killed him, Mike. That fucking brat, Gabriel. I fucking bashed his head in, and I choked him to death with my hands. You're not gonna tell anyone, are you, my son? This is your secret with your dear old dad. You love me, don't you, Mike? You love me more than anything." He had gone on to explain there would be 5 vials of remnant. 1 already inside Mike, 1 for Dad, and 3 for Evan, Liz, and Mom. 3 to bring them back. "Maybe I'll keep going after that, Michael," Dad had said, laughing, "because this is the only time I ever feel alive anymore. Isn't that nice? You took fucking everything from me, Mike. And now, I'm finally living again. You fucking idiot. You killed my son. You killed my daughter. My wife." Jeremy looked deathly serious now.
Stop being so mean to yourself. Please.
Jeremy's voice had never meandered so softly before. His words never picked so precisely.
Okay. I'll be nice to myself.
There was a lull in the conversation. The music faded into the background, and Mike wasn't sure how he had the willpower or volition to commit to his next act. But he leaned in close, and his lips brushed against Jeremy's. And they held that position there, hardly breathing, until they both broke away. and Jeremy broke out into a smile so wonderful that Mike felt like he had finally breached the surface. And then his goddamn door flung open. "Michael!" Dad stood in the doorframe, oblivious to privacy, but likely privy to what had just happened. Mike was flushed with scarlet, and Jeremy was excitedly looking to Mr. Afton like they were good friends. Dad cleared his throat, and without looking at Jeremy, he never looked at Jeremy, he said, "It's getting late." That was code for "get this trash out of my fucking house."
Okay, Dad. Good to see you, Mr. Mike's dad.
Dad did not even hum a tune of disapproval. He only stared at Mike with something unrecognizable. And then he shut the door. Jeremy beamed at Mike.
You think we could do that again sometime?
Mike's heart simultaneously leapt and fell.
Really? Yeah, Mike, I've been wanting to do that for a really long time.
He proved his point by leaning in again and kissing Mike once more.
See? I'm no liar, Mikey. Yeah, we could. We could do that again.
Jeremy nodded, collected his things, and said before he left,
June 28th, 1919. That's when it was signed.
When Mike went downstairs a bit later for dinner, Dad was already drunk. His head was on the dining room table, the record player spinning something by Ella Fitzgerald that he and Mom used to dance to. Someone to watch over me, he groaned, lifting his head only to drink. His hair was matted to his forehead, his shirt wrinkled. Mike didn't think Dad was a drunk, but ever since Mom died, he drank a lot.
Do you want me to make dinner, Dad?
Mike asked, his throat dry. Dad sluggishly picked up his head, and after a minute, he nodded. Mike was able to make pasta with jarred sauce with little difficulty, and after 20 minutes, he had a couple of bowls for him and his father. Mike sat next to Dad, silently eating while Dad only stared into the bowl like it was a bottomless abyss. "I know that you fancy boys, you know," he suddenly said, and Mike wanted to flee away forever, running away with Jeremy so that he would never have to face wrath for liking boys. "Oh, don't give me that look, you dolt."
I'm sorry.
Dad stood and waved him off. "I do not give a damn," he hiccuped and wiped his face. "That you prefer boys, Michael."
Oh. Okay.
He thought relief would flood over him, but it didn't. There was only the acute fear there always would be, never subject to being washed away, especially not from the cause of it all. Then, Dad chuckled. "Do you really think he's good enough for you? You're a bloody Afton, and he's trash." Mike gulped.
Please don't say that, Dad.
Dad huffed and grunted and swung back another drink. Then, staring into his glass, his eyes seemed much sadder, much more human, and he muttered, "He is gonna break your goddamn heart, Michael." And then he left for his study. Mike had lost his appetite. He knew Dad was always right, but not now. Not about Jeremy. Because Jeremy was good, and light, and kind, and everything. And Mike was allowed to care more about Dad. He was. Because he loved Jeremy Fitzgerald, even if the boy could break his heart. Mike would let Jeremy break his heart and his soul, if it meant he could kiss him again. Sometime thereafter, Mike Afton's world ended. A little girl, Cassidy apparently, went missing at Freddy's, and both Dad and Uncle Henry were arrested for it. Mike thanked everything in the universe that the cops didn't interrogate him, because he knew he'd crack, and that Dad would go to jail. Dad and Uncle Henry were released, though, and Mike thought that that would be the end of it. There's 5 of them. That's enough. Dad can stop now. Christ. Mike was a little monster and fool for not telling anyone, wasn't he? When Mike was doing his homework, just before 1985 ended, and he and Jeremy were going steady, in secret, of course, but it had been 5 months, and he had never been happier. God, he just wanted to give Jeremy the world. Dad stormed home. There was a panic and amusement in his eyes that was entirely opposed to him. He ignored Mike and rushed upstairs, packing a bag, careful to keep the remnants safe, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, the gun from the safe, and went back downstairs. Mike was frozen in fear, only moving when Dad bent on one knee, grabbed Mike by the shoulders, and stared into his eyes. "You," he said, breathing like he had just sprinted a marathon. "Are my greatest experiment, Michael. You are strong, and you tire no longer. You will live forever. Understand?" Mike nodded. God, how he understood. God, how he hated it. Good, good. You are going to wait for me, eh? You will always wait for your old man.
Are you leaving on a trip, Dad?
Dad looked paranoid, jumping at the smallest sound as he raked a hand through his hair, and he nodded. He nodded. I've got to go away for a while, Mike. None of them understand. None of them can comprehend what we are doing. That we're going to bring them all back. And I will fix all of it. Do not trust anyone, Mike. Just your old man.
What about Uncle Henry?
Especially Henry. He is a bastard of the lowest sort. He's going to kill me, Mike. If he gets the chance, you tell him nothing. Understand? Do you understand? Mike hastily nodded. He was already crying because he didn't want Dad to leave. He couldn't live without his father.
Can I come with you?
Dad chuckled, shaking his head. No, Mike. But do not worry. I will not be gone for long. I am going to continue my research, and I will return them all. And we will finally be happy.
But
Mike gulped and stared at his feet.
I've been happy, Dad, with Jeremy and Uncle Henry and you.
Mike started sobbing.
I don't want you to leave. Dad, please don't leave me. I can't take people leaving anymore.
Oh, Mike. In the oddest gesture, his father embraced him, so tightly that Mike thought he would burst. He thought this was it. This was how his father would kill him, loving him too much. There was something nice about that, Mike deludedly thought, because no one else in the world had died as loved as he was. And he closed his eyes, waiting for Mom to pick him up by the ear and scold him for scaring Evan, and then she would tell Mike she loved him. But no, that wasn't right. Mike would never go to heaven if it was real. I told you we would be alone together forever, son. Do you still believe that? Mike had no choice but to nod affirmative. Good. So smart. My obedient son. Dad, please. Please don't leave me. I will not be gone forever. I don't want you to be alone, Dad, Mike exclaimed, and he shut his mouth tight, because he wasn't sure if he had ever interrupted his father before. He was ready for Dad to strike him across the face for his insolence. But Dad only quizzically stared at him, tilting his head, examining a problem with no functional solution. Don't let anyone hurt you, Mike, he whispered, and it sounded so fond. But Mike was clever enough to understand the true meaning. I am the only one allowed to break you. You're mine. Do you understand? The moment you think I am truly gone, I will come back. I'll come back. And the rest of them will come back. I am going to drag them back from hell and bring them here, Mike. I will go through hell for the lot of you, do you understand? Mike didn't reply. His dad had been gone for a long time, he thought. Dad had been gone before Mike had even been born. Mike didn't tell his dad that he loved him. Instead, the last thing he thought he'd ever say to William Afton was, I'm sorry about your heart, Dad. It was in this solemn, manic flash of greyness in his father's eyes that Mike, for the first time, understood that his father was broken. That Dad had always been broken. Even if Mike didn't kill Evan, he would still be Mr. Afton's first and truest victim. And for a second, Mike was overwhelmed with pity and disgust. And God, he was so old now, wasn't he? 16 years old. And Dad was in his 40s. And Christ, they were both so tired and broken. And Mike couldn't comprehend how his father clung to life like a cockroach. And that's what Dad was, wasn't he? A cockroach. Mike finally understood. He finally understood that he didn't just love his dad, nor fear him. He fucking hated his father for everything. Dad stood, did not acknowledge Mike again. But Mike thought he whispered something as he grabbed his bag and headed out the front door. But he was probably just imagining the idea. And after standing still as a contorted statue, 20 minutes went by, and Uncle Henry burst into the house, a gun in his hand, and he asked where Dad was. Uncle Henry's voice entirely mad like it had never been before, and Mike just said, "He left." And Uncle Henry scooped Mike into his arms and sobbed. But Mike didn't. His tears had been exhausted a long, long time ago, he thought. Mike's life was quieter, and Christ, it was so much better. Uncle Henry, too, didn't mind that Mike preferred boys. He even blushed scarlet upon the discovery, which Mike didn't really understand, but that allowed Jeremy and Mike to hold hands in the Emily household, kissing when Uncle Henry wasn't looking. Uncle Henry was a really great father, Mike realized for the second time in his life. Uncle Henry cooked Mike breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And he threw the paper out every morning because they both knew there would be speculation on where the hell is genius madman William Afton. And he went to every single one of Mike's wrestling matches, cheering louder than anyone in attendance. High school got a bit better after that, too. People were entirely consumed with pity when they looked upon Mike, which was much better than fear and hatred. So he had fake friends, and parents that superficially doted on him. And if he closed his eyes tight, he could pretend that they all actually cared. The best part, though, the best part, was Jeremy. They went on dates every weekend, smoking in the forest, holding hands in the movie theater when no one was looking, taught each other how to skate and draw, and Mike thought if his entire life could be like this, he'd be happy. He still stared at the front door, at the landline, waiting for Dad to enter, to call, to bring him back home, to resurrect his dead family. Because he hated Dad and loved him so much. But the worst part was not knowing where he was. After dating for 8 months, Mike told Jeremy he loved him for the first time, and Jeremy almost choked to death on the sushi he'd been eating, and with a tight throat, Jeremy had said, "I love you too." Mike had raved to Uncle Henry the entire night. Mike listed the things he loved about Jeremy. His words, endless, his smile, bright, his hair, unkempt, his freckles, starry, his laugh, genuine, him, everything. He balanced out Mike in every regard, and brought an easy lightness to his chest, and a warmth to his brain. And when they held hands, everything finally felt correct. Just before graduation, when Mike was 18, in 1987, Jeremy had strung a wrapper from his candy bar around Mike's finger, and he said, "When we get out of this town, you marry me, all right?"
They were so young.
Uncle Henry, after staring too long at a portrait of Charlotte, had clapped Mike on the back, tears in his eyes, and said, "You've done so well, Mike. You're going to go to college, or come help me in the shop, and you're going to do so wonderfully. I am so proud of you." Mike hadn't decided what to do after high school. Yet. He wagered he'd work a bit, make some money for an apartment that he and Jeremy could share, and just exist in an unsteady peace. One particularly brisk summer night, though, the phone rang. Uncle Henry wasn't home, so Mike popped his gum and walked over to the landline. "Emily household," he greeted, because the only person that ever called for him was Jeremy, and Jeremy was in his bedroom upstairs. "Michael." Mike's heart sank, and he was being pushed under the waves once more, because he hadn't heard this particular voice in more than 2 years, and 5 fucking children had died the last time he had heard that voice, and he had been dreading and greatly anticipating this reunion from the moment he realized he hated his father. "I know Henry's not there right now. Just listen, boy. You understand?" Mike swallowed down air, frozen, trying not to shake from fear. He failed. "Elizabeth, she's there." And when his father grunted on the other end, Mike could practically smell the alcohol in his breath. She's in baby. Circus babies. You've got to get her, Michael. Understand?" "Dad," Mike stammered, and his throat was drowned with tears. "What are you—" I've got the remnant, Mike. I just need her. I need you to free your sister. She's in the sister location, yeah? You've ought to get her for me." Dad hadn't asked how Mike was. If he wanted to live again. If he and Jeremy were still together. If he had any hobbies or new friends. How Uncle Henry was. He, once more, had demanded something from Michael Afton. And Michael Afton would always obey his father. "Oh, okay, Dad." Good. Still obedient to your dear old dad. "Dad, where are you? They've been looking for you." "Nowhere, Michael. I'm nowhere. I told you though. I'll come back. I'll return. Don't you worry. I'll come back. And Evan, and Lizzie, and Mom, and don't you miss them, Mike? Christ, you bastard. Taking them all from me. Breaking my things." Mike sharply inhaled. "I graduated, you know." Dad hummed something on the other end, and then said, "Go get your sister." And then he hung up, leaving Mike's ears ringing. He went upstairs, manipulated by strings, and Jeremy chuckled, handing him their shared joint. And Mike took it, resting his head on the crook of Jeremy's neck, listening to him play an out-of-tune guitar as he willed everything in his body to sleep. He didn't.
I love you, Mikey,
Jeremy whispered. And Mike whispered,
I love you, my honey.
And he stayed awake, ready to obey his father. Michael Afton died in 1987. Well, he should have, at least.
You won't die,
his sister, or baby, or whoever, said. And then the scooper jutted into his stomach. He never had been that smart, he figured, with a mournful chuckle. He fell onto his stomach, his blood flooding the floor, and the amalgamation of the animatronics that Dad had created for his family. Ballora, Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, and Baby slinked over to him, the metal wires like snakes lurking into his guts. It was a pain more disgusting than the sensations he'd experienced when Dad had first injected him with Remnant, but less acute. Instead, it felt like everything in him was getting removed with a melon baller, being replaced with something that didn't quite fit inside of him. His veins shining a bright purple, forcing him to never succumb to mortality. The wires wrapped around his limbs and coerced him into stillness, his body wishing to thrash against the sudden intrusion.
You won't die.
Wasn't his life supposed to flash before his eyes? I'm finally dying, aren't I? He could only think about how he had failed Dad. He wonders why Lizzie had tricked him like this. But then, he knew. He deserved it. It wasn't him. It was like he was swimming in an endless pool piloted by a benevolent God. And he waited for Dad to fix him as his body lurched down the street, smiling. What a madman that Michael Afton. Just like his father. I am just like Dad. And he fell to his knees and coughed up what the amalgamation called Ennard. And the metal sank into the sewers. And Mike heaved, gasping for air, staring at his hands as he kicked himself to the surface of his mind. And his hands, holy hell, they were a faint purple. It was like his skin was falling off the bone like a cooked chicken. And what happened? What happened? What happened? Where was Dad? Where was Liz? Where was Jeremy? Please, where am I? Mike stumbled to the Emily household, and he didn't remember being lifted into his bed, the immortal and the restless playing downstairs. And when he came to, Uncle Henry was sobbing, and Mike was releasing pathetic laughter. Because no, he realized, he hadn't failed Dad. He freed Liz.
I did it, Dad,
he muttered, and then he fell unconscious again. Jeremy couldn't see him like this. Mike kept telling Uncle Henry to send the love of his life away, but Jeremy was nothing but persistent. At least now Mike looked like the monster he felt like. A corpse. When Jeremy called, Mike held the phone to his frail skin. And Jeremy said,
Mikey, what?
But then Mike cleared his throat, nearly fell, and summoned his father's voice to the line. You are nothing but trash, and I don't want you near me any longer. Do you understand? You could never be good enough for me, so just leave me the fuck alone, Fitzgerald. And he hung up the phone. And he didn't eat or drink for days. But at least Jeremy didn't call after that. Dad had been wrong. Jeremy didn't break Mike's heart. Mike broke his, only to spare him the indignity of being attached to a corpse. And from that day on, Michael Afton was half dead, barely alive, and was composed of nothing but a broken heart.